I would like to help in that. And so we decided that we were going to practice this. So this goes back. Wow. Is Sue in here? And listen, we just bare our souls. This is who we are. This is, we're that old now. It doesn't matter anymore what people know or what they think. But I'll just tell you, if it's been a blessing to us, maybe it'll be a blessing to you. But it gets at the side. It's probably been 30 years now. And the idea is that when a woman has her period, you don't have sex while there's a flow and for 7 days afterward. Now, here's the genius to that. If you decide to practice this, men, it's going to force you to show restraint during that period of time. And if your wife can get to the point where she knows you can trust during that period that will be held sacred, that period, it means that you can touch her, you can hug her, without her thinking that this is going to lead toward the bedroom. Because she knows it's not. And that allows you to establish that level of trust. Now, there's another piece to this. I suspect that God probably knows the nature of women and men better than women and men do. He knows their balance in this area and what's appropriate and what's a right balance. Because a lot of men, their balance isn't right. And because their balance isn't right, their wife has become way out of balance on the other end. This is extremely common. If it's not for you, God bless you. But it is for many, many couples. And so my guess is that God knows a pretty nice line to draw between how much sex is meaningful to the man and to the woman. So as I said, Sue and I started practicing this. And, and it would kind of get to be, is it 6 days or is it 7 days? We'd start to talk about that. And we would look forward to coming to the end of that period of time. And we found that it really did make our marriage, you get it. I don't need to go beyond that. So again, God won't love you more if you do this. But I really do wonder, as we've practiced this through the years, if God doesn't know the balance of what a man and a woman needs, and that this is a line that does a pretty good job at striking that balance, but it really does give a man, if you've been in that arena or you're in that place where your wife is afraid you're going to come at her every time you touch her and you need a safe time, this is a way to get it. It really is. Now, I want to read an article. This was in Time magazine, and it's called A Woman's Best Defense. This is written by, let me read it. Biologist, in the Quarterly Review of Biology, the biologist by the University of California, Berkeley, has proposed a radical theory of menstruation that not only challenges accepted wisdom, but stands it on its head. According to Prophet, a woman's flow is not some incidental event in the reproductive process or just a sign of failed fertility. Instead, it is a mechanism that protects fertility by preventing sperm-borne bacteria from infecting the womb. Prophet argues, she's the author, Prophet argues that by unquestioningly accepting the traditional view of menstruation, physicians have unwittingly sabotaged a woman's natural defense with inappropriate medical treatments in case of uterine infection. She says this: in fact, menstruation makes women more susceptible. Menstrual blood may itself actually even act as a vehicle for transporting infection. The idea is that the flow of blood carries the infection out of her body. So she says Prophet's reasoning begins with the observation that potentially harmful bacteria can catch a ride into the womb and fallopian tubes by attaching themselves to sperm, the microbes. So she's trying to pass out the bacteria, and the sperm then carries it back into the fallopian tubes. The microbes can come from the male or get picked up in the vagina during sex. Menstruation eliminates the threatening intruders in two ways. But then it goes on and says, but what about women who are pregnant or have gone through menopause? Since they don't menstruate, how do they ward off bacteria? Prophet notes that in the first 6 months of pregnancy, and in some cases after menopause, the cervical entryway to the uterus is covered by a mucus plug. The mucus makes it hard for sperm and their nasty hitchhikers to enter the uterus. So do you get that? That the flow of blood is to carry bacteria out. Having sex during that period can cause the sperm to carry the bacteria back in to the fallopian tubes. Then, hence, the reason why Orthodox Jewish women have a lower case of cervical cancer. So, again, you can dismiss all this. God won't love you more if you do or you don't, but there may be some genius to this. And then we get to this area of oxytocins, which are interesting. Before we leave sex, let's look at some of these issues. This is oxytocins. This is an interview that was done with a gynecologist. This is what he says. Here's the psychology. When we look at how God created men, often women just dismiss a man's sexual drive by saying it's animalistic or it's all about physical pleasure. I'd like to suggest, relationally, it's much different than that. When you look at the way a male brain is wired, a male brain has about 10 times less oxytocin than a female brain. Now, oxytocin is the loyal bonding chemical. The man has 1/10 as much as a woman. Oxytocin is the loyal bonding chemical. It's how women bond with children much quicker than men do. It's why women might be looking at each other in each other's eyes as a table as they sit across from each other at Starbucks. Men don't do that. When we're together, we're hitting someone or killing something. You know, we're hitting a golf ball or shooting a pheasant or something like that. Women just sit there and stare into each other's eyes. There's only one time, listen, there's only one time in human experience when a male's oxytocin levels reach the level of his wife, and that is immediately following a sexual encounter. Now, why does a man want to have sex with his wife? Because he never feels closer to her than following that experience. Now, women may wish that there were 10 other ways that he'd feel closer to her, and I know many of them do. But we have to understand that God is the one who created the male mind. And I think it's brilliant what he's done and how he's created this physical drive in men, that if a man is wise, he knows how to maintain the relationship for that physical relationship, to have any meaning for his wife, and that's going to continue to draw him toward his wife. And that's expressed, and when that's expressed, his love for his wife is renewed in a very powerful way. So it is true. A man will feel closer to his wife after having sex. I can't speak for a woman, but I do know for a man that is true. So that is something chemically that happens in the area of sex. And with all this heavy stuff, I thought, well, let me read this first. It says, why is sex so important? What kind of emotional needs benefit number 1. Fulfilling sex makes your husband feel loved and desired. Not surprisingly, the first thing that surfaced from a survey were the comments that having regular mutually enjoyed sex, having a regular mutually enjoyed sex life was critical to the man's feelings of being loved and desired. One eloquent plea captured it perfectly. He said, I wish my wife understood that making a priority of meeting my intimacy needs is the loudest and clearest way she can say, you are more important to me than anything else in the world. It's a form of communication that speaks more forcefully with less room for interpretation. Another related that sentiment of power being fulfilling, of power of fulfilling sex. He said, quote, a man really does feel isolated, even with his wife. But in making love, there is one person in this world that you can be completely vulnerable with and be totally accepted and non-judged. It is that solace that goes deep into the heart of a man. Number 2 benefit, fulfilling sex gives your husband confidence. Your desire for him goes beyond making him feel wanted and loved. Your desire is a bedrock form of support that gives him power to face the rest of his daily life with a sense of confidence and well-being. And number 3, it can cause a wound. If she doesn't want to, I feel incredible rejection, a man said. As much as men want sex, Most of them would rather go out and clip the hedges in freezing rain than make love with a wife who appears to be responding out of duty. My husband Jeff exclaimed, quote, "The guy isn't going to be rejected by the hedges." And that's the issue. If she's just responding because she has to, he's being rejected by his wife. Again, keeping in mind that what he wants most is for you to desire him, try to see this rejection issue from a man's point of view. If we agree, but don't make an effort to get really engaged with the man we love, he hears us saying, "You're incapable of turning me on even when you try, and I really don't care about what matters deeply to you." On the other hand, if we don't agree at all, but throw out the classic "not tonight, dear," he hears, "You're so undesirable that you can't compete with a pillow, and I really don't care about what happens very much." Although we might be saying we don't want sex at that point in time, he hears the much more painful message that we don't want him. Here's what men said in the survey. Number one, she doesn't understand that I feel loved by sexual caressing, and if she doesn't want to, I feel incredible rejection. Second, when she says no, I feel that I am rejected. No is not no to sex, as she might feel. It is no to me, as a man, as her husband. And I am vulnerable as I ask or initiate. When she says no, it is plain and simple rejection. Third, she doesn't understand how even her occasional dismissals make me feel less desirable. I can't resist her. I wish that I too were irresistible. She says I am, but her ability to say no so easily makes it hard to believe. So just some thoughts on why sex is important. And then I thought before we move off of this, there are two more articles, sorry. You might find this fun. In the Mishnah is a compilation of Jewish tradition, the oral tradition. So the Jews believe that God gave the Ten Commandments to Moses, but he also gave him a lot of oral tradition that they passed down from elders to elders to elders. And finally, in like 200 to 600 A.D., they compiled it into the Talmud, the Mishnah. This is what the Talmud says, how frequently people should have sex. You'll find this interesting. The sexual duty of which the Torah speaks, Exodus 21, is those without work, those who are wealthy of independent means, can have sex every day. Workers, twice a week, ass drivers, once a week, camel drivers, once every 30 days, sailors, once in 6 months. There you go. You probably don't want to be a sailor. It says, she who rebels against her husband's declining to perform her wifely services. These are what they do to women that won't fulfill their wifely services. Number one rabbi said they deduct from her marriage contract 7 denarii a week. How long does one continue to deduct? Until her entire marriage contract has been voided. Rabbi Yoz says, quote, he continues to deduct even beyond the value of the marriage contract, for an inheritance may come to her from some other source. And then it inclines, and so is the rule for the man who rebels against his wife declining to do the husband's duties. They add 3 denarii to her marriage contract if he refuses. So it's even in the Jewish law. And one last thing on this before we move off. And this is it's called Soulful Sex, the surprising benefits of a sex fast. What's it like for cohabitating couples headed for marriage to abruptly stop having sex until the wedding day? Easy, says Mariah, age 23, who's lived with Jerry for 1.5 years. Hard, really hard, says Kate, who abruptly stopped having sex with her fiancé. This is what Mariah said, and then I'll move on. Mariah and Jerry are 2 months into their sexual fast. She has no idea why she wanted to stop, except that she didn't feel like sex was a necessity in their relationship. She was nervous about how Jerry would react and had braced herself for a shouting match before bringing it up. But he surprised her by saying he'd been feeling the same way. It's different, Mariah says. We've been close to each other. We haven't fought nearly as much. We've been more honest about our fears and the things that we've wanted to talk about. There's been no secrets. It's been almost more intimate than it ever was between us. It's just been so cool. As she talks about it, you can sense her welling enthusiasm. Before, if we fought, we thought it was sexual tension, so this has forced us to be more honest and open with each other. And say, for example, no, this is what I'm upset about. In other words, they've had to focus on communication and conflict resolution, the kind of skills that make for a healthy, enduring relationship. And as they do so, they're finding they enjoy one another's company more than ever before. And so I've mentioned this, and this may apply to you, it may apply to some others. But when we do marriage counseling, premarital counseling, if the couple's living together, the best solution is to separate until you're married. We try to encourage that. If that's not practical, different churches take different positions. I'm just telling you where we are. We ask that people refrain from having sex until they get married. Now, I could tell you a bunch of stories here. I'll just tell you one. There was a couple who'd been married, who had been living together for about 14 years. And she was a member of the church here, and he was not. He was a Catholic, and nice guy, came to be a believer later, but during this period. And we went to visit them because he asked if I'd do the wedding. So it was Sue and me and them, just the four of us. And we're in the house, and we got to the end of talking about the whole wedding ceremony. And I said, now, the only thing, again, they've been together for 14 years. And I said, now, the only thing we ask is that you not have sex until your wedding date. Now, this was about 2 months away. And when I said that, he involuntarily went like that. He didn't want to. He just couldn't keep it in. And I said, I laugh, and I always say the same thing. I said, look, I'm not going to get a ladder and prop it up to your window and look in. I said, in fact, I'm not going to ask you. I'm not going to ask you if you complied with this. I'm just asking. And really, if you do, I think God will honor it in a very special way. Now, this couple, they were friends of ours. And I wasn't sure how that was going to go. Well, we did the wedding. They then attended this marriage class after the wedding. And this is when we held the class over at Legends Cafe. And the last night, this night, on the 6th night of that class, after they were married, everyone else left and they stayed. And he came up to me with tears in his eyes. And he said, Tom, I just want to tell you that we did not have sex those last, whatever it was, 2 months before the wedding. And he said, I'm telling you, it was the most meaningful time of our entire relationship. It was just remarkable. And so I'm not shy about suggesting this to people because God will honor that time. Let me tell you one more quick story because it's just so cute. I married a Hispanic couple, and they had been together probably 15 years, had 5 or 6 children. And I say to them, how about, just not have sex? I know you guys, you have, your womb has been opened many times for all these children. But maybe, look, it's today's the 15th. You're getting married on the 15th. It's only 30 days. I said, you can probably do this for 30 days. And they said, and they talked and they laughed, and they were a really neat couple. And then as we kind of closed that part of the conversation off, she looked at me with a little twinkle in her eye, and she said, there are 31 days this month. Did you get it? 30 days I asked them to wait, but there were now going to be 31 days. So anyway, I thought that was pretty cute. So let's go on. We said this before, men, this is in your book again, that you would ask God to give you eyes to see your wife as the most beautiful woman on the face of the earth, and that you'd never lose those eyes. And again, I don't know why God would not answer that prayer to you, that God would give you those eyes. I'm not sure I shared this before. I don't think I did. But, I've been married to my wife now for 42 years. And in those years, I've come to know her different eyes, what her different eyes look like. I know her different laughs, and I know her different eyes. But there's one set of eyes I saw a number of years ago that I never saw before. And it was striking how different they were. Because she doesn't typically look at me with questioning, doubting looks. But this was that look that day. And I said to her, I said, Sue, you are the most beautiful woman on the face of the earth. And she looked at me with these eyes like, and this is what her eyes said, I so want to believe what you're telling me. But Tom, how can that be? I'm getting old. My face is getting old. You know, I tell people the way we deal with that at our house, every 2 years we put a 10-watt lower bulb in the bathroom. And so the light keeps dropping and we keep looking the same year after year after year. But, you know, it means a lot to my wife, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. I do. I think she's the most beautiful woman on the face of this earth. I tell you, I have a picture in my office of her when she was 30 at home. I think she looks more beautiful now than she did when she was 30. And the reason is because I think she has so much inner beauty that comes out on the outside that just keeps building year to year to year. So, you know, guys, we should pray that God would give us eyes to see our wives as the most beautiful woman on the face of this earth, and that those eyes would never change. And so as a part of that, you know, try to pay attention to her in public settings. You know, because what that does is it says to the rest of the world and those looking on that you still are dating your wife. You still love your wife. You still pay attention to your wife. You still do those cute things with her because she's still that person, you know. And so, you know, and it said one of those complaints about women is that he's just not a gentleman. You know, consider opening the car door for your wife. Help her on with her coat. Open doors for her when she walks. You know, when I was at the dealership, my office was right outside the front doors of the dealership. I had a big glass window, and I could see people in the lot walking into the dealership. And I'll tell you, there were a lot of times, most of the time, I would see husband and wives get out of their car, and I'd see the man walk into the dealership and the wife walk in 10 feet behind him. He'd open the door. By the time she'd get there, it had just slammed shut, and then she'd open the door. You know, guys, we shouldn't do that. We should take care of those things. And so women, you can train your husbands on this. You really can. You know, try this and say, look, how about you open my car door for me from now on? And if he doesn't open the car door, you stay in the car. He's going to go in the house, have a cup of coffee. He's going to turn on TV. He's going to notice someone's missing. And you're going to yell your name. You're going to yell your name again. And he's going to find you out in the car. So if I can encourage you to do that. And the last one is number C. No, not the last one. Letter C is she feels cherished when she knows you're her top priority. And the idea is that she needs to be your top priority in God's eyes. You know, I think I've kind of covered that. The best thing you can do for your children is to love each other. The best thing you can do for your children is to love each other. Model to your children what a healthy, strong marriage should look like. Because where are they going to learn that? Where are they going to see that? And guys, remember that a woman spells love T-I-M-E, time. So we need to reflect that in our schedule. Take vacations, go on dates, do things that she would like to do. Sue told you about the surprise trip that just blew me away. And talk a lot. Talk a lot. And cherishing means sharing your life and your day with her, your life day by day with her. And we've said this, intimated this earlier, but let her into the interiors of your life. And this calls for a high degree of transparency. You know, really be transparent with your wife. Let her know what you're thinking, where you're at. You know, a friend of mine said one time, I can't let my wife hear me confess my weaknesses. Listen again. I can't let my wife hear me confess my weaknesses. Do you think she doesn't already know your weaknesses? She knows them probably better than you do. My wife knows my weaknesses better than I do because we have blind spots. So we need to be transparent in those areas. And as you open up to your wife will open up as well. This is why for many women, their best friend is another woman. And your goal, as we said before, men, is to always be your wife's best friend. If someone ever asks you who's your wife's best friend, you should know that she would say it's you. That's your goal, to be your wife's best friend. And cherishing her means having her on a silver platter. You know, women want to have their husbands be the guy who rides up on the horse and whips her up and carries her off into the sunset. And that means treating her that way. Here, have opened the car door, help her with her coat. Appreciate her, give her sincere compliments. And we've said this before, but don't talk bad about your spouse in any setting. Don't talk bad. In a counseling setting, that's different. But in a setting with family, be careful. Sisters, be careful. I've seen that really come back and cause problems, where the family doesn't forget something you said, and you and your husband have worked it out a long time ago. Just be really careful about that. This thing about talking about your spouse in a public setting, there's an article, How Infidelity Begins. I'm not sure if this is in your bulletin or not. I don't think this is. It's called How Infidelity Begins. It's written by John Drescher, and he's reviewing a book called Running the Red Lights, written by Charles Meilander. He says this, Meilander points out that adulterous affairs don't just happen. There are no sudden moral failures. Persons go through predictable stages. The mind has a great capacity to rationalize questionable actions, and a wrong relationship can sneak up on anyone who's blind to warning signals or who denies what's happening. What are some of the yellow lights? Number one, be aware of any emotional delight outside of marriage that is not taking place within your marriage. Pardon me. Be aware of any emotional delight outside of marriage that is not taking place within your marriage. An emotional affair precedes the physical one. This is called the conversational stage. One finds special pleasure with one of the opposite sex outside of your spouse. It seems innocent and enjoyable and is often denied as being dangerous or doing anything wrong. But it's a yellow light soon turning into a red light. The principle here, infidelity begins with feelings that one is not doing anything wrong because one enjoys chatting with another who is stimulating and seems to have much in common. Second phase, beware when you look forward to the next time you talk together or the next time you hug together with someone other than your spouse. This is the touching stage. This is a red light when it gives emotional delight. Subtle sensuality flows through touch. Ignore this flashing red light and you are headed for a head-on collision. Beware when your heart jumps, when you see another, think about another, or look forward to seeing another. The principle here, emotional infidelity precedes sexual infidelity. Third, beware when there are feelings that another is meeting your needs. This can easily lead to seeking special times together, even doing wonderful things together. Sometimes persons will be serving even on a church committee and begin to feel a special closeness. Here there are romantic signs sent out as a person begins to believe they belong to each other. This is the possessive stage. Yet because they're not sleeping together, they are convinced that nothing is really very wrong, and that because they're not committing adultery. He says, I remember a couple who were best friends with another couple. They were part of a church small group. The husband or the one wife of the other felt vibes between them, but simply said they made each other feel good. They offered each other support and were blessed. When the husband left his wife for the other wife, his wife was devastated and said, "How could he do this with my very best friend?" The principle is that deceit and dishonesty always precede adultery. Let me say something here about adulterous affairs that we've learned through the years. And that is that when someone first gets into an adulterous affair, they literally believe that they can live in both worlds at the same time. They think they can stay married to you and have that affair, and no one should have a hard time with that. They really do. As crazy as that sounds, they think they can have these two circles come together and intersect, and no one should have a problem with that. The children shouldn't have a problem with that. The spouse maybe wouldn't like it, but really, I deserve to be happy, and this is how I'm happy. And they try to do that. Satan so blinds them. So it says deceit and dishonesty, they are being deceived as well. Number 4, beware of undetected lust. This begins in the mind. We enter dangerous territory the first time we let any fantasy enter our mind about another other than our spouse. It shows itself in thinking about the other during the day, even imagining what it might be like to live with such a person. Soap operas today feed on this kind of infidelity. Husbands who let their minds dwell on lust for another woman through pornography, by association at work, or pleasure, are headed for the illicit. The principle here, fantasy about happiness with another is a flashing red light. Number 5, beware when there is a diminishing respect for your spouse. This is subtle and not detected at first. When we feel one or more of our basic needs are not being met, and we see no hope for change, a disillusionment sets in, which makes one very vulnerable for unfaithfulness. Any feeling that it's not fair, or that other woman is cool, or he's stupid or unloving, etc., gives a feeling of justification for being with one who seems to meet certain needs. The principle here, when disrespect creeps in, the wise spouse takes action to save one's marriage. Number 6, beware of feelings of lost love. Every marriage goes through cycles of disillusionment, but when tender talk, lovemaking, and time together grows less and less, red lights are flashing. Then one is prone to feel that they really goofed and should be with another. Yet all the facts of those who divorce and remarry again, 65% will break up a second time. And if children are involved, 75% will break up a second time. It's much easier to repair a marriage than to divorce and start over. The principle here, disillusionment drives a person in the arms of another who is also disillusioned. And number 7, lastly, beware of the 4 great enemies of a happy marriage: complaining or criticizing, contempt, defensiveness, and withdrawal. John Gottman, who wrote the book What Predicts Divorce, says these 4 form a cascade toward marital disillusion. Gottman says that research with thousands of couples, these 4 come to the top when there is separation or divorce. Again, it is complaining or criticizing, contempt, defensiveness, and withdrawal. The principle here, love grows by doing the same things which built love in the beginning, to which nurtured love in courtship. And then you might find this interesting. 5 myths about cheating on marriage. Listen to these. These might surprise you. Number 1, cheating is more common among the rich and less among conservative cultures. From golf star Tiger Woods to Republican presidential contender Newt Gingrich, cheating seems commonplace among famous and wealthy. But although studies have found that the more money and celebrity men have, the more likely they are to cheat, cheating is hardly the domain of just the rich and famous. In fact, according to Boston College economist Donald Cox, poorer women are more likely to cheat than wealthy women. Listen to this one. If you really love your partner, you'll remain faithful. Perhaps one of the most tragic misconceptions about cheating is that people stray because they have fallen out of love with their partners. We are taught to value fidelity as the litmus test of a relationship and and conditioned to feel victimized if someone cheats on us. But my research shows that young men don't cheat because they've fallen out of love with their partners. Rather, they cheat simply because they desire sex with someone else, even if they want to preserve the relationship. That one surprised me. That's something I think young couples especially need to understand. That it is not just that they don't love you anymore, they've fallen out of love with you. It's that they want to have sex with someone else. Because my logic would be, something's wrong in the marriage and the love has diminished, and now it's not. It many times is not. They still love you, but they want to have sex with someone else. This is why it's so important that we discipline ourselves and just will not go there. So, let's keep going here. And lastly, those pages, listen to the counsel of your wife. We've said this before, but the genius to the way God set this up is that the woman is under the authority of her husband, but the husband is to defer the decisions to her wishes. So technically, in reality, she has her hand on the thermostat. And as we said before, the reason that the woman is subservient to the husband is not because she has less capabilities. In fact, as we've proven, I think any study will prove this, women are just as, in fact, are, I believe, more capable than men in most areas. And in the economy of God, the greater is always for the benefit of the lesser. So it makes sense that God would put her with all those abilities and talents in that role, because as a husband defers his decisions to her wishes, she ends up in that position where she's really controlling that to a large extent. And so this goes back to this idea of listening to the cautions of your wife. We've said it before, but it's worth saying again, that there are many times, men, where we will, and again, this many times is with money. Men are good, men can be big schemers and dreamers and have plans for large amounts of money. That, if I invest in this will bring our ship in. This is the windfall we've been wanting to find. And the wife is saying, no, I just want to keep the mortgage paid. I just want food on the table. But he's willing to take that risk many times. Not that it can't go the other way, but it is typically this way. And so what you will find is that God is trying to talk to the man about putting brakes on that project, but he's not listening because he wants what he wants. I don't know about you, but I find in my own life, the times that I do not go and seek counsel are the times that I really want what I want, because I don't want to hear someone tell me, give me a counter position. And isn't it funny how so many times when that happens, you in your heart of hearts know they would say that's a dumb idea. But we don't want to go ask because we don't want to hear that. And so God's trying to talk to us, and we're not listening. So he'll talk to our wives, and he'll give them the counsel that he's trying to protect us if we were just listening. And so, guys, the idea is when your wife speaks about matters, especially financial, and especially if they're sharing an opinion based upon incomplete facts, where you know they don't have enough information to take such a negative position about your idea, that is many times God trying to speak through your wife to protect you. So, in this area of finance, let me just leave you with an idea for a goal. If you don't have a goal, you're never going to achieve it. Is that true? I mean, if think about it, if you just start driving somewhere and don't know where you want to go, you can end up anywhere because you have no goal in sight, and you will end up anywhere. The same is true with debt. And if I can encourage you, especially younger couples, or older as well, try to make it a goal, if at all possible, to live debt-free. To try to get through your life with as little debt as possible, and even no debt if at all possible. Now, the Bible never says it's a sin to borrow money. It's not a sin to borrow money. And that's really important you hear that clearly. It is not a sin to borrow money. But God has a better way. A better way. And the idea is, when we borrow, actually, we're mortgaging our future to have today if we believe that God provides for us all that we need. If we believe that. That's your starting point. Then every time I'm borrowing, I'm mortgaging my future to have what God would want me to have in the future so I can have it now instead. That's what it always is. So years ago, in fact, in the early 80s, I went to a business conference, for Christian businessmen up in upstate Michigan, the UP. And there were mainly larger businesses there, Christian businesses. And they were talking about this issue of debt-free. And they said a number of interesting things. Number one, they said, for instance, you'd be surprised how many businesses are debt-free. Hewlett-Packard was at one time debt-free. AMP was at one time debt-free. And so they're talking about this, how all these businesses are debt-free. Now, I went to college, and I was taught, you use other people's money. You borrow 4%, you make 6%, you net 2, you're ahead of the game. You have to borrow money just to get started. How else could you start a business? And so as we're in this business seminar, they're talking about all these businesses that have never borrowed money, all these larger businesses. And they said what will happen is they'll start out slower, but then once they start to ramp up, they really take off because they don't have that debt load. And I'm listening to the stories, and I'm hearing the scriptures. If you borrow, they will be the head, you will be the tail. If you don't borrow, you will be the head, and they will be the tail. The borrower is servant to the lender. All these principles. So I'm hearing the stories, I'm hearing the scripture verses, but then they shared this statistic, and this one blew me away. Now, again, my goal in life is not to be wealthy, so please don't hear that in what I'm going to share next. I want you to hear the principle behind what I'm going to share. This is what they said. Fortune magazine does a Fortune 400. They used to do it, they said, every year. And in that Fortune 400, they list the 400 wealthiest people in the world. That year in particular, they asked those 400 people, if there's one particular principle that you follow that you feel has enabled you to amass the wealth that you've amassed, what one single principle would come above all other principles? They didn't give them a list to choose from, just what would it be? 75% of the 400 said, I never borrow money. That blew me away. Now I have the scriptures, I have case studies of businesses that do this, and I have a statistic that 75% said the number one principle they follow that has enabled them to amass that amount of money is that they never borrow money. Now there's some interesting things when you move into this arena. Number one, you will find, and I've watched this in people's lives, folks, and I have. This is absolutely true. When someone gets out of debt, when you finally get out of debt, there is a level of contentment that sets in that you will never find until you're out of debt. Because I think this is what God says. He says, look, if you're not content, you're never going to be content. If you're not content with what I've given you and you want to borrow, you want to mortgage your future to have that now instead of waiting for me, it's not about getting that next thing. You're never going to be content. But I have watched people that get to this point, and there's a level of contentment that sets in that does not come until that happens. So what I encourage you is make it a goal. Maybe that seems like a big stretch to you, but again, you'll never get there if you don't set a goal. So back in the early 80s, when I came home for that conference, I said to Sue, I want out of debt. I said, I want out so bad, I can taste it. And we had a whole bunch of loans. We had a mortgage, a bunch of car loans. I had made a very stupid investment in gold and silver at that time, and I had that's another story I'll tell some other time when I feel more vulnerable, but some really bad things. And so I had a new car. I sold it. I owned my own cars. I sold my car. I bought a 400-hour Escort with no air. I drove that for 2 years because I was sincere. I wanted out of debt. And I wrote a piece of paper, and I said, it's my goal to be out, and I still have this paper. It's my goal to be out of debt by this date. And I wrote in the paper, and if this happens, it'll be a miracle because that's not possible. And on that date, we could have been out of debt, but there was I was waiting for gold to go up a little higher, then I would sell. That's just me telling you who I am. But we were out of debt. And the day I went and paid the mortgage off, this thought struck me. Years before that, I'd been in a Christian seminar where they encouraged you to give everything you have to the Lord. And when that happened, I gave everything we had to the Lord. Our house, our car, all that stuff. But the day I paid off the house, I realized I had not given God the house because it was the bank's. I couldn't give to the Lord what was the bank's. This is the first time I could give him the house that I wanted to give him. And so if you're in this situation, you just start with the smallest loans first, maybe, and then if it's between which of those 2 or 3 loans, take the ones with the highest interest rate first and get those paid down and just start working at it. But you won't ever get there if you don't set it as a goal. People say that money some say it's the number one cause of stress in a marriage, and I just encourage you in that. One other thing is in blended marriages, and if you're divorced and marrying, and there are children, let me just encourage you in this, or if you know couples who are in this setting, because we've been through this a bunch of times. I'm not saying this is the exact answer, but it seems to work the best. And that is that the biological parent is the one that does the disciplining, and the other one kind of stands by as a backup to that, but that the one marrying in does not try to discipline primarily, because that leads to disaster. So I could tell you a lot of stories about that, and I'm not saying it works in every situation, but really, we've not seen anything that works better than that. And if you think about it, listen, if you're, let's say that you're the mother and you have a daughter, and usually it works this way, either way, man or woman, but a lot of times, because you're separated or you're divorced from your husband, and maybe there's been a custody issue, or there's been some fighting over who gets time with the children, the one parent starts to go real lax on them because they're afraid that if they become the disciplinarian, they're going to want to go with the other parent. And so that just gets milked. And so the child, as a result, isn't disciplined very much, or maybe as much as they should be. Now this new marriage partner comes in and sees that, and they say, honey, you are letting her get away with murder. And he tries to toe the line. And the daughter says, you are not my father. And that thing gets worked in a very ugly way. So the idea is for the one marrying in to back away and allow the biological parent. And here, again, just lastly on this, if you think about it, if you're in that setting and you're the man, and this is a daughter to your wife now, what do you want her to learn? You want her to learn what a Christian man looks like. You would like her to one day look for a man like you, like your wife's new husband. But if you're in an adversarial relationship, that's not going to work that way. She's not going to think a lot of you. She's not going to respect you. She's not going to. So that's just a thought. How do we begin? Not sure what that. Oh, that's opening the car door for your wife. So now that you see that picture, I know you're all 100% in and opening car doors. How do you begin? You have a good funeral. You have a good funeral. You know, there aren't many problems in our lives as Christians that wouldn't be solved if we just have a good funeral. Ours. We need to die to self. We need to die to the old man and allow Christ to live his resurrected life in us. So the idea is, if there are areas that we've talked about where something needs to change, a good way to do that is just die. Die to self and allow Christ to live his resurrected life in you and through you. We're out of time, but we're not out of Bible. Aren't you glad? We have a lot more Bible to study, so let's close in prayer. Father, I thank you for this time together, and I pray, Holy Spirit, you take what we've talked about, some of these ramblings, some teachings, that phone call coming in, Lord, and Lord, just use this, Father, to help our marriages become more of what you want them to be. Lord, you love the people in this room. You love them so much. And you know so intimately well what is going on in every one of these relationships. And for those that are here engaged, not married, you know what they're going to face. And so I pray, Father, that what we've talked about that would be helpful, beneficial, in some way make an impact. Lord, did you allow that to stick and become a part of who they are and how they love? And Lord, we ask this all in Christ's name. And all of God's people said, amen. Amen. Hey, thank you for your faithfulness over 6 weeks. And God bless you all.